Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the third and final day of RBC DSAI's first conference on deployable AI. The first talk of the day is interpreting deep neural networks for medical image diagnosis using concept graphs by Professor Ganapathy Krishnamurthy. Professor Ganapathy Krishnamurthy is an associate professor in the Department of Engineering Design at IIT Madras and a PI of the Medical Imaging and Reconstruction Lab. His research interests are in developing automated image analysis methods for diagnostic medical imaging and image reconstruction methods for X-ray computed tomography. Over to you, Professor Ganapathy Krishnamurthy.
Thank you. Let me share my screen. Suppose I'm allowed to do that. Is everybody able to see it? Okay. Okay. Hi. Thank you. So I'm going to present this work done by my students and of course myself, along with a collaborator from Mechanical Engineering, Dr. Balaji Srinivasan. I'm Ganapathy, and I'm here to talk about interpreting deep neural networks for medical imaging using concept graphs. And before I start, I'd like to thank the organizers of this conference for letting me present this work. I think it's an interesting conference, and this topic is very relevant to what is being discussed. Okay, so let's start off with what is interpretability. I'm sure you heard in the last 2 days a lot of experts on explainable AI, etc., talk about this. But in the context of medical imaging, just to understand what interpretability means. So here are some definitions from a couple of papers. Basically, interpretability is the degree to which a human can understand the cause of a decision. Again, this is very relevant to what very relevant in the context of medical imaging. Or in other terms, you can call it interpretability is the degree to which a human can consistently predict the model system. So basically, what these two put together mean is that we would like to be able to understand what are the computations that are happening in a machine learning algorithm. Especially for deep learning algorithms, it's a challenge because of the multitude of layers, hundreds of layers in most modern networks. And we have a diagnosis task, and most clinicians would like to understand what's going on inside. Okay. So why do we need this? The higher the interpretability of a model, and it's easier for someone to understand decisions. Okay, so we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next few slides. And we can always say that model is better interpreted than another model if it's easier for a human to interpret what's happening. It's easier for a human to understand the decisions and the cost behind the decisions. Okay, so why do we need this interpretability, and especially for medical imaging analysis? I'm not going to talk about any other application, specifically in the context of medical imaging. And in fact, you can say computer-aided diagnosis. Okay, any computer-aided diagnosis system would need this, and most computer-aided diagnosis systems would, in some form or the other, use medical images. These are images arising from your X-rays, CT scan if you've done a CAT scan, or MR imaging, etc. All of those things fall under medical imaging. PET scans also. Okay. So we see a lot of publications in Nature, and other highly cited papers by a lot of accomplished researchers, which talk about huge success, on par with radiologists, the accuracy of diagnosis, etc. But then you will see that not many of them have made their way into clinical use. So the major problem is because of interpretability. So here in this context, it's important. So why do we need this? Because it's the problem behind deploying it in the clinic is because you cannot just say the AI system said so, right? So you have to be able to, let's say there's a patient's image is input, let's say chest X-ray, and there's a deep learning network. Maybe you're using one of those very 1,000-layer network or something, and output is there is a presence of pneumonia, or let's say even lung cancer, right? And then how do we ascertain it? How do you trust that output? Because that will dictate treatment later on. Okay, so that is one aspect. So depending on the radiologist's input, based on the system that you have deployed, the AI system you have deployed, further treatment happens. So you cannot just say, my deep learning network said so. So it will be easier for the computations within the network to be transparent, in order for the radiologist to trust. When I say transparent, you don't have to understand every little thing being done, but then at least in the context of this work, what you're trying to say, layer wise, you have to understand what's happening. That's one. The second thing why we need interpretability is from a strictly, again, this is deployable, talking about deployable AI. When it comes to, medicine, the practice of medicine, there are always regulations. All countries have it, all societies have it. And from a regulatory point of view, it's very important because, we have these decisions. Okay, there's a patient coming in. and you say, okay, patient, and then just and the neural network, and finally some treatments done. Maybe it didn't turn out so well for the patient, but then you should be able to go back and see what happened, right? In general, we should be able to understand what is happening inside the network in order for to apportionate blame or responsibility. Right? So because you cannot just blindly say no doctor, clinician, or a team of experts can say, okay, AI system said a tumor, so I gave this drug, and then the patient, something happened to the patient. You can't. That's not possible, right? In a real life scenario, you cannot have that kind of scenario. You should be able to say something very concrete about why certain decisions are made. And in that context, in that regulatory context, it's important for interpretability. Again, I'm using this, interchangeably with explainable AI, which is, I think, what people have talked about in the last few days. And again, I don't really differentiate between the two, especially in the context of this work. And you will see why, because we are strictly dealing with a certain subset of tasks. So just to abstract what interpretability means, we just try to understand why did the model make that prediction. Here, model, we are, at least in this talk, I'm only model I refer to convolutional neural network, a deep convolutional neural network. Make that. What are the, why did you make that prediction, right? And when can we trust the prediction? Is the to the output. That's one. These are two questions we strictly try to answer in this talk. And of course, the last, how can we correct the errors in the model? We haven't addressed it, but that's one way of making the entire system itself pretty, try to make interpretable deep neural networks. We can maybe guide training using that, etc. But we haven't covered that. We'll talk about the first two. Again, in the interpretability occurs in various contexts. We'll look at that later on. I'll just go through some of the related work. I'm just going to just cite these words. Most of them are quite popular, and and I think most people working in this domain will be able to understand what these methods are. So we kind of provide three attributes to these words. Attention map. So if you look at all this dissection, GradCam, sharp line, concept activation vectors, etc., they all produce attention map, which is basically highlighting parts of the input that are relevant to a decision, right? So that part is always done by all of these techniques. So the references are here. You can look them up for the details of these methods. I cover a couple of them very briefly in the next few slides, but it's up to you to. And of course, concept based. Are they concept based? When you say concept based, what we're trying to do is, are we able to relate it? Is it a human understandable concept that's being brought out in this work, right? So if you look at all of them, they are not. So basically, dissection, GradCam, sharp line, etc. They just identify regions in the images. It's not necessary. You don't actually have a concept associated with the regions. You have to manually assign them. Because the TCAV does do so because it explicitly tries to figure out concepts, but in the input domain. Okay? It does it in the input domain. And there is the last point. That's where we think we have some. We're doing something new is in the hierarchy of steps. In a sense, there's no specific hierarchy of decision making. Of course, we do always learn. When you start learning about CNNs, is that it's a it extracts features in an extra hierarchical fashion and so on and so forth. But when you do this kind of interpretability, that step is typically missing in most of the methods you have cited. But of course, they are all very effective methods, not to say you can't use any of them. And they are being used in a variety of medical imaging contexts. So the dissection, we just to look at a couple of them. Dissection, I'm not going to spend too much time, but dissection is wherein you decide on which layer to dissect, and you just kind of do a forward pass till you reach that layer, and you threshold the activations, and then you upsample it to the input image size, and then see which are the active regions in the input. So this is one way. Again, this doesn't require any gradients. The GradCam does require gradients. So you start off with the output activation. Just take the softmax output, and from there, you back propagate to the network to the layer that you want to stop at, and you do use the gradient maps to get a weighted average, and that gives you, the focus region. That is basically the bright regions here, since red are the regions which is in focus, which is the basis of that particular output. Because in this case, output is tiger cat, and you can see that the place where the tiger cat is has a very bright activation. So the GradCam is one where it's gradient based, where you use back propagation, and graded back propagation is another step for doing that. Okay. So these are the two most relevant approaches to our paper right now. So the proposed framework. So what we want to do here is we are trying to interpret a segmentation network. Now, I'm assuming all of you know semantic segmentation is. We do need segmentation tasks in medical imaging. Okay. So when people typically talk about interpretability in medical imaging context, they're basically it's the only thing that that typically would come to mind is okay. I'm giving a chest radiograph, some breast mammogram, and then I want to say whether it has cancer or not, whether yes or no. That kind of network is what people typically think about. But segmentation is actually a very important task in medical imaging. So it comes to play when you're trying to do tumor treatment. So for instance, somebody has a brain tumor or a liver tumor, etc. They undergo some very high resolution scans either using CT or MRI. And these are volumetric images, bunch of slices across the human cross section. And you would like to label pixels in those volumetric images, 3D volumetric image, as belonging to either the tumor or not. Okay? So this is a typical segmentation. Now this becomes very important because if you want to do a surgery, people typically want to know where the boundary of the tumor is, and that accuracy is very important. Okay? And again, if you indicate some sets of voxels as tumor, again there has to be some explanation of why that happened. Again, like you said, from regulatory and again auditing point of view, it's important. The second aspect is again a dose calculation. So, for instance, when you do radiation therapy, the edges of the tumor have to be properly delineated in order for to make sure that a lot of the radiation dose that you are putting actually falls on the tumor and not on the normal tissue which might surround the tumor. So, in all of these tasks, the segmentation is important. This is for why segmentation is important. Again, the same arguments that I put forth for why we need interpretability in a segmentation work, that's what holds true here. I mean, in a computer-aided diagnostic setup also holds true here. So we do need to find out the person, whether the radiologist or the oncologist who is using these networks to determine tumor boundaries, tissue types within the tumor, has to necessarily know or understand why these voxels were labeled as tumor or not tumor. Okay? So in this particular work, we are going to consider brain tumor segmentation. Again, the data here is freely available. It's open source data and fully labeled, and it's usually made as available as part of the brain tumor segmentation challenge happens every year. And it involves segmenting the brain MR images into 4 classes, I believe last I saw. And there's one more class in the sense it just presents some results based on diabetic retinopathy classification. Again, this is a very popular task. There are CAGR challenges, etc. on this, and again, because this is again very relevant to the Indian population. Also, we have a lot of diabetics in the country, and they do at some point or the other experience this condition. Okay? So these are the 2 data sets that will be handled with the work that I'm presenting. So here's the proposed framework. So what we want to do is, the idea is we are just going to analyze a deep neural network. Okay, it's a CNN. Okay, so it has multiple layers. So we have an input image, which is basically a slice, or in this case, we are only done for 2D. 3D is a difficult thing to do computationally, but you only do it for 2D images. So you input one slice at a time, it goes through a bunch of these layers, and the output is basically semantic segmentation. So it's a fully convolutional network. And what we want to do is interpretation. What we mean by interpretation is you want to find out at every layer what are the concepts involved, like what concept is being highlighted by that layer, and following that, we want to have we want to identify some robust concepts in the sense that it is there present in pretty much every data point that we see. And we also want to see what the connection is between different concepts in each of the layers, right? And once we're able to link these concepts to, and then we make them part of a graph, it's a conceptual graph. And we follow this graph from input to output, and this gives us a trail. This is what you call a graph trail. So the idea is the twofold. One is once we identify the concept, we have to actually give a textual description of the concept. At this point, we are just relying on radiology. I'll show you the results wherein radiologist has given us a textual description, which is pretty good actually. We didn't have that beforehand. It's only after the fact we showed him, and he was able to give a description of what those concepts were. So the idea is, if you give an input, then we can actually follow based on every layer what is being found out. In the end, why is it that this out? Then we use as a reasoning as to why a particular output, a particular voxel set of voxels were labeled as such. Okay, so that's a proposed framework. So concept formation here, what we do again, just to go back, when we say concept, we are primarily dealing only with the weights of the network. Okay, so we don't actually do work. We work mostly with the weights. The weights define the concepts because that's what actually gives rise to the actuation. So what we do is we work strictly with the weights. So in this case, when concept formation is done in the weight space, not in the. So typically, what we typically do is you would see many of the other interpretability work. Again, it's also meaningful to do that. It's also easier to work with. To work mostly with the activations. Right here, we are working with the weights. So first concept formation is we identify concepts in the weights. Okay, again, this is a fully trained network. Okay, so it's not it's post-op. So then only after the training you do this, right? So in every layer, you find out you group the weights, or basically you cluster the weights. Okay, we use k-means clustering. Okay, that's the simplest thing to use. And then we decide on the number of clusters based on the silhouette coefficient. So if you look this particular plot, you see this every row is every row is a filter. Right? So the top 50 odd are basically one set, and you see the 3 bands are there, right? So 3 bands are all similar. If you think of every row as a filter. So these are grouped in one layer, and the way we make sure that 3 is the best number is we use the silhouette coefficient to identify optimal number of clusters. This is typically used in a lot of k-means applications. So once we identify these concepts, so in that sense, we identified these set of weights. So we said, okay, this cluster of weights gives rise to are similar, right? But we directly operate in weight space. When you say similar, we use engineering distance. So we say these weights are similar, or they are clustering, and they correspond to a concept. That's our hypothesis. So what is that concept? Now we have to figure out what that concept is. Here we use we are using this GradCam type of analysis, or very similar, except that instead of output activation, we look at the activations provided by a cluster of weights. So since we have clustered the weights in every layer, we can choose each cluster, and we instead of for a GradCam analysis, typically people would just look at the output in the sense an average output activation or just one output activation. Here the output activation is replaced by the average over the clusters of activations provided by weights in a particular cluster. And then of course this is similar. If you read the paper, this beta parameter is very similar to the alpha that is given in the paper. And then we obtain these class activation maps. Or this is very similar to GradCam analysis, except that the output activation is approximated by the activations to the weight clusters that we got in the previous step, right? So then if you look, if we do that, then there are 2 things we have to do, right? Once we identify that GradCam, okay, that's all great. We have these concepts. Concept in the sense, we have to identify in the image, what are these weights, what is that weight highlighting? What are these weights filters highlighting? So that's what we have done here. So the attention maps overlaid on top of the original images of the brain. Okay, so then we have to make sure that 2 things. One is the consistency, wherein we make sure that it's like if we have to do it over the entire data set. So we chose a subset of the input data and ascertain that it's the same attention obtained by a single concept over multiple images in a data set, which could be similar, right? You can't have a similar bunch of weights highlighting tumor in one set of images and highlighting normal tissue in another. In this case, this is shown for just for an example. Then all the concepts here are basically highlighting the tumor, and so maybe some places there is a bit noisy, but mostly it's in the tumor, right? So that's one thing. So that's the concept consistency. The robustness is, we want to make sure we look at the attention obtained by a sampled concept. Okay, it should be similar. So what we do is we look at a concept. Now this concept is made up of a bunch of filters. Now they form a distribution. Now we can sample from the distribution and figure out what the attention maps look like. And if you do that, you see that it's surprisingly very similar. So this is the actual attention map based on some of the actual filters, and these are the sample filters. Okay. So that shows us that this is why we call robust, right? Because these filters are very similar, and you form some form of distribution. And again, now this is very useful in figuring out if the distribution is very narrow, then we hit a really good concept, right? Distribution of the filters is very wide, then you get very noisy attention maps, and we can discard that as a concept. So that's one way of understanding what this concept robustness is, right? So once we have that, now this is when we follow the graph. So we started off with clustering the weights to get some preliminary idea of what concepts are, and then we use the GradCam kind of analysis to get what these concepts really mean on the image side. And what we know, so now every layer will have a particular concept, and these concepts are basically related to a set of filters in every layer. And now we want to find out, how are these concepts in each layer, successive layers. So you can do successive layers or can even skip layers, but we have done in successive layers. How are they related? It's very simple just to understand this. So we have these concepts here was C1, C2, C3, C4, and the next layer we have concept B1, B2, B3. what we want is what is the influence of concept C2 on concept Z1, B2, B3, right? And we do that by zeroing out the weights corresponding to C1, C3, C4. This is what we call pre-interventional distribution. And then we look at the distribution of the corresponding feature maps following this. And post-interventional is basically then we want to see if how a particular concept C2 is affecting a particular concept B2 in the next layer. Again, this is accomplished by zeroing out all other weights. Now, how do we then figure out what the point in doing this? If you want to see how much does C2 affect each of them, okay? So if C2 affect each of them equally, and if C2 affects B2 much more than the others, then we know that C2 and B2 are connected, right? So that's the edge between them. If C2 and B2 are graph nodes, then you put a edge between them. So the way we figure that out is we do like a normalized mutual information between the pre and post interventional activations programs, and if over a certain threshold, again this is empirically determined, and then we say the C2 and B2 are connected. Okay? So are there the edge between C2 and B2. So how much of C2 is going into the B1, B2, and B3, and which concept is it overwhelmingly affecting? So it's overwhelmingly affecting B2. Then we say that these two are connected by a node, by an edge. Okay? So in the end, this is the concept graph, right? So we start with the input, and we identify concepts in every layer. And each concept, of course, is from the k-means, which is given by of course, this is multidimensional. We assume Gaussian or some other distribution, we have a mean and a standard deviation for each one of these concepts. And then we also identify which of these concepts impact which of the concepts in the successive layers. So if you want to see a trail, so let's say we give an input and we have a corresponding output, and we want to see why that was done, we just follow a couple of these trails. And of course, we want to make sure that it's when you follow these trails, we have to associate an explanation for each of these concepts, right? So that's what we'll see in the result section. I'll show you when you say C1, what is concept C1, what does it mean? And this actually post this analysis, we showed some of our attention maps, concept attention maps, as I call it, to the to radiologist, and he was able to actually provide very intelligible descriptions, radiology-based descriptions on what these maps are. So just to show you, so this is just A to L. So they correspond to the concepts in every layer. Again, these are successive layers, need not be again increasing in number, but I don't know whether they are adjacent. I'm not very sure about that. But we can look, if you look at, let's say, D, okay, there are some interior key points, okay, and so F is it's basically lateral left hemispherical and tumor core brain boundary. Okay, so this is actually a description provided by the radiologist, not by us. Okay, and H is anterior tumor boundary. Again, the superscript is the layer, the subscript is the concept. Okay, and C017 is lateral brain boundary and tumor core. Okay, this is A. So these are actually descriptions provided by the radiologist himself upon seeing these maps that we just showed him these maps, and he said, okay, this is how it seems. Of course, some of these we come up with concave edges, for instance, linear edges. But these are some things are quite obvious to the eye. But again, the anatomical understanding is definitely provided by the radiologist himself. Once again, if you want to, this is not a trail actually. This is just in every layer what is each concept. So if you want to do a trail, let's say the top and bottom here, we show two trails. The bottom one is not that great, but the top shows you going from, I think it has a tumor, I think enhancing tumor, sorry. It has an enhancing tumor and what is called an edema. And if you read out a trail, then it actually, if you see some trails capture these edges, some of the concepts capture everything else other than the tumor. Some of them capture the edges of this edema and of the brain itself. Of course, some of them capture the interior of this class. And finally, we get this output, which is two classes here. Similarly, at the bottom, we have, again, there is one concept which always captures the rest of the tumor brain rather than the tumor itself. And of course, the edge, one-sided edge here, so on and so forth. So this provides you. So if you want to understand what this means and how do you read this as, how do you make this interpretable, is the following. There's an input image. This is, you describe the slice, and radiologist can describe the slice by himself. And a concave edges, white matter region is C2. C3 is tumor boundary, C4 is lateral brain boundary, C5 is inferior brain boundary. So this provides a trail that can be used for interpretation. Of course, this is, we have only shown you places where we are successful. We haven't really gone to a point where we look at where it's completely off, and then we look at the trails. Maybe are they less meaningful? Then it's actually a very good troubleshooting tool as well. But again, this is the general idea behind this interpretability study. This basically for a segmentation network, can we have an explanation as to why a certain segmentation was obtained? Again, this is very useful from a regulatory and an auditory point of view. I will close this with a with trail visualization for a diabetic retinopathy. Once again, this is the classification task. I believe one of 5 classes, rating the severity of the diabetic retinopathy. Once again, these we showed this to the expert post our analysis. So we just showed this trail, and they were able to see that each of these concepts, C1 is the ones highlighted in green, if you can see them, hard optic cup, hard exudates. The C2 is exclusively hard exudates. C3 is blood vessels here. C3 is each column here. And then C4 is blood vessel and soft exudate, so on and so forth. So each of them is actually capturing some, and in fact, these are the features that somebody who is diagnosing diabetic retinopathy himself or herself would look at, not arrive at a conclusion as to the severity of the disease. So we're able to automatically get that out. Of course, we still have to make the connection as to a sum of these goes to make decision, etc. For our diabetic retinopathy, I have to point out that this is like a classification task rather than segmentation task, but we just want to highlight that also. Okay, so the code, of course, a lot of all the work done by my former student, DDP student, also fellow at Robert Bosch, now his PhD, and his GitHub page is here. Just go there, and he's made an excellent software package. You can try to use it, hack the code if you want to understand more about it. So I'm any questions? I mean, I'm open for questions. Should I stop sharing now?
Yeah, I think that should be okay, I guess. Yeah. So maybe we would want to first take questions from the panelists.
Yes, definitely. I'll just I'll be here.
Yeah. So yeah. So first we will take questions from the panelists, and then we would move on to questions from the attendees.
So this is Arun. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yes.
Hi. Good talk. So you started by saying that so one of the things about explanation is how confident you are about the explanation is also important, right? So where does that fit into this?
Yeah, okay. So this second part in that when I said about the abstraction, yes. So when you read off the trail, right? So this part where can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So this trail should be meaningful. So you cannot be, for instance, instead of let's say we have a trail wherein none of this happened, but some it's looking at some random things in the image and then saying, okay, this finally in the end it's each of these concepts are looking at some random things in the image and finally I get this output. So what we mean by providing some confidence, we mean that the trails when we read off it should be meaningful. That's what.
Oh, I see. Not that you get something from the model itself, but it's more like a post hoc interpretation.
This whole thing is post hoc. Yeah, we don't do anything inside. Yeah, that's true. No, it's post hoc. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Actually, that to answer your question better, if you look at this is actually a better for the diabetic retinopathy. This is actually a better trail to go through because these concepts actually zero in on a lot of the things that an expert would look for in order to make a decision about the severity of the disease. So as long as we get similar meaningful concept maps in every layer, then we probably are okay. But it's kind of very qualitative at this point, I would say. Yeah. There's no hard number which says like, okay, if it's 0.9, it's very robust. If it's 0.1, it's not. So that's we don't have that.
Sure. I get that. Thanks.
So do we have any more questions from the panelists? Yeah, I think then if there are no more questions from the panelists, then I think we can take the questions from the attendees. So there's a question. So the one question is were the concepts well separated or did they overlap? So this is
So there will be some overlap. But we only consider, of course, see there are a lot of heuristics involved. I agree. So we only looked at concepts which are well separated. So definitely every layer. So we that part, we have to really examine the code where we heuristically decided what concepts to take and what are. So because sometimes if you look at the distribution of weights when you do the concept robustness, some concept clusters all over the place. So we actually had to discard them. So that's where we discard them.
I think people also seem to need some pointers to the GitHub link and also free data sets.
Yeah. So can I just put it up there? I'm just.
Yes,
can you just please write it down, please?
Yeah, I think this would be, I think, enough.
Please, if you want, yeah. You can just search for Avinash Puri, and this paper is also online. You can, I think, if you look at my Google Scholar page, it will be somewhere there, and you can just email Avinash and you can.
Yeah. So there is also. Free, so. Yeah, there's also pointers requesting towards, free data sets.
Yes. So okay, so if you know how to use Google,
yeah.
So just Google brain tumor segmentation challenge, and it should take you. I think there's a BRATS 2021 is going to happen. So there is links to that. I think it's even available on Kaggle. I'm not really sure, but it's you can easily find it. Just Google it, but you have to register for it. So it's not a big deal. You just have to give your affiliation, and you should be able to download it. It's truly freely available, so it's not an issue, and well curated data sets. Anything else?
Yeah. So there is another question. So does it have to interpret the noise in the segmentation? So this is another question.
Yeah. No, we haven't. So that's what. Okay. A couple of things we haven't done. That's why I mentioned it. I guess there are things we didn't. So for instance, if you look at the trails that the concepts we presented, they are not exactly the same. Like for instance, there is one slide where I showed the same concept applied on different images. Okay, so we take, let's say, we figure out a concept based on the clustering, and the idea is, if we put 100 patient images through it, it should look the same. They don't. There are some noise here, and there will always be some noise. Yes, and we have not. And there is one thing we have not done is when the segmentation is wrong. Let's say the output is wrong. What do these things look like? No, we haven't presented that or analyzed that in detail. We were very happy to obtain a trail when it works. So yes, that part is there, and it is very consistent. So one thing is whatever I presented, we have consistently looked and through the entire data set. We didn't overfit, I'm pretty sure, and what we saw was very consistent. That part we are very confident about. But what happens when there is too much noise? What happens when it's wrong? When your output is wrong, in the sense you're over segmenting or under segmenting? We haven't given those results. We haven't analyzed that in detail.
Okay, so I think we also have one more question. So this is from a this is from a doctor. So how do we account for the wide variation in the quality of images from each MRI or CT machine when we are nearing implementation of this? So
yes. So that's a completely different problem. There are many. See that is so okay. So the brain tumor segmentation, this particular data set itself is drawn from different centers, but they are not indicated in the data set. So when we actually train them, so we're going to randomly pick them up, and I guess we are accommodating images from every different center or machine in the training data itself. And then when we test, the test data typically is not from the same centers. The organizers withhold some of it so that they can give it as a test. So at this point, there's no particular, we don't make any particular efforts to take no domain adaptation or any kind of other things to make sure that what we train with a particular data set, and then we go to a completely different center. The network hasn't seen the data at all and will it generalize well. That study we haven't done, and I don't think too many people have done that. So yes, that's pending. Yes, the answer was no, we have not done it. That's something to be done.
So I think so let's again thank Professor Ganapathy Krishnamurthy for the talk, and yeah, so thanks.